Good evening, I'm Melissa Ridgen with your APTN National News. Two Indigenous leaders are weighing in on Pope Francis's proposed trip to Canada. Both say, at the very least, it should include an apology to residential school survivors. APTN's Fraser Needham explains many wanted to go much further.
News broke Wednesday that the Pope may come to Canada. When this may happen and what it will entail are unknown. The government also had its first cabinet meeting on Wednesday. New Crown Indigenous Relations Minister Mark Miller said a papal visit was news to him. Lorraine Whitman says her organization had reached out to the Vatican 2 months ago, but had not heard back.
We did send a letter from our national office of NWAC, to the Holiness, and had asked him that, for the apology and what have you, because the families deserve that. That's part of the TRC, number 58.
Cassidy Caron says Métis residential school survivors want the Pope to say the Church is sorry.
What I'm hearing is that if the Catholic Church wants to engage in reconciliation in a good way, it all must begin with an apology.
Whitman says the discovery of unmarked residential school graves has served to reignite trauma.
The church was one of the institutions that was there because the dollars were given for them to take care of our children. And we noticed with the Kamloops, the remains of our children, and then it just re-traumatizes us.
Caron says Métis people are hopeful but skeptical at the same time.
I would say that there's a general sense of maybe some cautious optimism. Maybe not too much optimism, but obviously just being cautious about it, because I do think there's a lot of diversity amongst our communities.
Both Whitman and Caron say the Vatican should pay full reparations and release all school records. I'm Fraser Needham for APTN National News, Ottawa.
Quebec has long promised to update its in-school curriculum. Well, this week, those changes were finally announced. They're replacing ethics and religion class with a Quebec values and citizenship class. And as Lindsay Richardson explains, the decision is not going over well with advocates for First Nations education.
J'invite le cortège à monter sur la scène pour la remise des doctorats honoris causa.
It was a night for the books. AFNQL Regional Chief Ghislain Picard and poet Joséphine Bacon, two members of the Innu Nation, receiving honorary doctorate degrees from a Quebec university. But as Picard was being honored, he was preoccupied by the future of First Nations education under the current Quebec government.
Je sens un gouvernement du Québec qui va beaucoup miser sur ce qu'il considère comme étant le nationalisme québécois. Et ça, il y a personne qui peut le nier, mais en même temps, ça ne peut pas se faire sur le dos des Premières Nations. Et c'est ce qu'on constate depuis plusieurs mois maintenant.
The tipping point for Picard was this week's announcement that Quebec was scrapping its ethics and religion course in favor of a Quebec values and citizenship course, focusing on Quebec rights and freedoms, state secularism, sex education, and Quebec's public systems. But when the province's education minister was pressed to give more details on course content, his response only fueled confusion.
For the culture, it's important for us to bring students to appreciate and understand culture with the emphasis on Quebec culture. Not only Quebec culture, but culture with the emphasis on Quebec culture. I think it's normal.
The last point on the Quebec-issued course guideline briefly mentions better understanding of First Nations and Inuit culture. But were they consulted?
Of course, we did listen to them.
On the flip side, however, First Nations stakeholders say they're shocked by this big reveal.
The surprise came last week when the title paints everybody from the same brush. And we were not at all consulted about that new title, which makes a huge political statement when it says that first and foremost, everybody's Quebecois from the same culture with no S.
The First Nations Education Council did meet with Quebec reps about updating lesson plans. Gros Louis says the first meeting seemed promising and Quebec seemed open to their ideas. But the recent announcement is a false start.
We want the content to be done and written by First Nation and Inuit communities and experts so that it truly reflects who we are today. We want to get rid of all those cliches from the Hollywood movies about shamanism and all that, because we want our kids, when they go from our schools to a local activity, or when they have to go to a provincial networked schools, that they're looked at as an equal student, not as someone that is weird because apparently at night they practice shamanism.
In a written statement, the AFNQL said Quebec's move will be taking us back years. In an open letter, the First Nations Education Council said Indigenous children do not need to feel like Quebecers to actively participate in Quebec society. Both want the course name changed to be more inclusive, and as a baseline, they want more transparency from government officials.
And we asked, what's this new title that we heard about from the Premier's introductory speech? Oh, well, we know. Be upfront with your partners. You want true collaboration, you want to reconcile, be upfront with your partners.
We reached out to the Quebec Education Ministry to see if they'd respond to this request and the open letters criticizing the Quebec citizenship course, but our emails went unanswered by deadline. Meanwhile, Quebec schools can start teaching the Quebec Values course on a volunteer basis at the start of the fall 2022 school year. Lindsay Richardson, APTN National News, Montreal.
Thank you, Lindsay. Well, we want to hear what you think about Quebec's revamped curriculum and lack of consultation with First Nations and Inuit. Here's how you can let us know. You can send your emails to news@aptn.ca. You can leave a comment on aptnnews.ca. You can also find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok. Follow APTN News and join the conversation and see our latest stories. Well, today is the 17th day in a row that Iqaluit residents are not allowed to drink their tap water due to fuel in the water supply. City officials say the likely source of contamination is a, quote, inaccessible below-ground void. 20 to 25 feet under the building seen here is a previously undiscovered fuel tank with a small space next to it. Officials say gas leaked from the tank, got into that space, and then leached into the water tank. Iqaluit's chief administrative officer explains.
It looks like perhaps there was some blasting done at one point, and there's a bedrock wall and a pretty small space between that bedrock wall and a tank. Like a concrete tank, the North Clear well. And an old fuel tank was located within that void, and it's suspended about 15 feet in the air in this underground void.
Water officials are expected to have test results early next week to give to the territory's health department, which will decide whether or not to lift or extend the do not consume order. Well, First Nations in the Yukon are reacting to a shooting in the small community of Faro that left 2 people dead and 1 person seriously injured. The shooting occurred Tuesday. A 61-year-old Ralph Bernard Shaw has been charged with 2 counts each of first-degree murder, attempted murder, and aggravated assault. First Nations across the territory are offering their prayers and support to the community. Tonight, the Ross River Dene Council will hold a sacred fire and healing prayer circle for Faro. RCMP also offered their condolences to the community.
Our thoughts and condolences go to the families, friends, and community of the victims. This is a tragic situation for the town of Faro and Yukon as a whole.
Turning now to the sexual abuse scandal rocking the world of hockey, sending shockwaves across the NHL and North America. Canadian player Kyle Beach alleges he was sexually assaulted by a former assistant coach of the Chicago Blackhawks. Longtime NHL coach Joel Quenneville is meeting this afternoon with NHL Commissioner Gary Bettman in New York. Quenneville was Chicago's head coach during the alleged assault back in 2010. He now coaches the Florida Panthers and was behind the bench last night as the team hosted Boston, but he did not speak to media after the game. Kyle Beach came forward on Wednesday first as a John Doe in the Chicago Blackhawks investigation, and he alleges that he was sexually assaulted back in May of 2010 when he was 20 years old by assistant coach Brad Aldrich. A report compiled by an outside law firm for the team says Beach disclosed the incident, but senior leaders of the Blackhawks seemingly ignored the accusations in the days before the team won the Stanley Cup. None of these allegations have been proven in court. Beach identified himself in an exclusive interview with TSN's Rick Westhead.
I've been a survivor. I am a survivor. And I know I'm not alone. I know I'm not the only one. male or female. And I buried this for 10 years, 11 years. And it's destroyed me from the inside out. And I want everybody to know, in the sports world and in the world, that you're not alone.
We've got to go to a commercial break, but when we come back, British Columbia is changing how it manages forests. We will hear from First Nations about what's planned. Stay with us. A Métis woman says she was mistreated at a Winnipeg hospital last week because she's Indigenous. Michelle Karlenzig has more about how the woman's experience could have cost her her life. Warning to our viewers, some of these images are graphic.
Jacqueline Flett describes a trip to St. Boniface Hospital in Winnipeg as degrading and embarrassing. The 38-year-old has diabetes, and after a painful foot ulcer, she went to St. Boniface Emergency. She said after 2 hours of waiting, it seemed like the staff had forgotten about her.
I was basically like, what's going on? Like, am I going to be seen? And what's the holdup? And I basically said, is it because of my Indigenous heritage? And at that point, they kind of got like, not belligerent, but they got visibly upset.
Flett says she then brought up past racist incidents like that of Brian Sinclair's, who died in a Winnipeg hospital waiting room in 2008.
They said, don't you even go there. And I was just appalled and shocked the way they were treating me.
That's when Flett said she started writing down her experience on her phone, and security approached her and took her phone. She was told to leave, though there were no recordings of her time at the hospital on the phone.
They said that that I had to leave the premises and that I could go receive adequate care elsewhere. And they were told that the nurses were refusing me treatment.
She says she got her phone back and left. The next day she went to Seven Oaks Hospital, where they found the ulcer had caused a bone infection.
I was really sick and I didn't receive the adequate care at St. Boniface, and I was escorted off the property, and I was embarrassed and ashamed, and it was just really very insulting and degrading.
In an email statement, St. Boniface CEO said, "We are investigating this matter to ensure we understand exactly what happened and to identify any issues that need to be addressed." They also said, "The events as described are troubling and do not align with the values of St. Boniface Hospital." Flett is now recovering on antibiotics and doing well, but will not return to St. Boniface. Flett says she wants to share her story because she doesn't want this to happen to anyone else.
We really have to start working together and start speaking out. Like, I don't want anybody to be silenced, and I'm hoping that I'm a voice for all those that were silenced, like Brian Sinclair, that never had an opportunity to speak for themselves.
Michelle Karlenzig, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
Should be noted that hospital sits right in the heart of the Métis homeland here in Winnipeg. Well, heading west now to British Columbia, where the government is looking to reshape forest management there. The changes will focus on sustainability and shared decision-making with First Nations governments. APTN's Lee Wilson unpacks the plan.
In British Columbia, people protesting old-growth logging have been calling for change in forestry management. Earlier this fall, the Sycus First Nation in northern BC made a declaration calling for consent before logging in their lands continued. The BC government agrees and say they want a paradigm shift in their old-growth strategy. Nathan Cullen, the Minister of Land and Natural Resources, says the tools for managing forest were handed to forest companies decades ago.
Much of the direction and authority had been given away to licensees, to large forestry companies. And over the last 20 years, we've really seen the results, that we've lost about 30,000 jobs. We've lost dozens and dozens of mills. We see more and more investment in forestry from BC companies, but not here in BC.
Last week, BC introduced Bill 23, which would make changes to Forest and Range Practices Act that would revamp forest management in the province. It would shift decision-making power from industry back to communities and First Nations. Minister Cullen says if this bill passes, the tools for old growth management and deferrals can be put in place.
What we're doing is we're working with Indigenous governments around BC, because that was the first recommendation, if you'll remember, from the old growth panel, was to make sure that we were engaging respectfully with the rights and title holders, not just running around with a map and a marker and saying, this is what's not going to be logged, this is what's going to be logged. Those are days past.
The Estela First Nation, located near Quesnel, sees the bill as a positive change. According to the nation's chief, Troy Baptiste, the previous policy and stewardship plan left little to no room for Indigenous input.
We had nothing to do with it before, so this is all new to us, and it's a learning process we're going through.
Chief Baptiste thinks improvements to the Forestry Act are a step in the right direction. The nation's been recently included in the landscape planning process with the province. He says traditional knowledge and modern forestry practices can come together for a healthy land for future generations.
First Nations, as well as other stakeholders, have valuable input on what interests they would like represented and how that process will look. This allows for forest landscape management that will improve the overall health and resiliency of the forest ecosystems and help to reduce the risk to biodiversity.
Minister Cullen believes conflicts seen in the last 10 to 20 years in BC could have been prevented by having Indigenous communities be partners.
Bringing people into the process very early on, respecting rights and title of First Nations and our obligations there, will make for much better plans over the entire territory and landscape. That's what we're doing as a government. That's just our values being expressed, and that's what we ran on the last election. So that's why you're seeing these things come up.
The bill is now in the legislation process, and Cullen estimates they are weeks away from getting it passed. Lee Wilson, APTN National News, Kitimat.
We need to take another break, but still ahead, doctors are prescribing you get yourself to a park stat. We'll explain that when we come back. Welcome back. It's time now for our photo of the day. Eric Tatuzis sent us this picture of the waves meeting the shore of Galiano Island in British Columbia. A nice, relaxing sight. Thank you for sharing that pic with us, Eric. It actually jives with our next story. You can submit your photo to share at aptn.ca to be featured as our next photo of the day. Be sure to include a location and a description of the photo. Let's take a quick look now at tomorrow's weather forecast. Off to the east coast, we got Fredericton 13 and sunny, same with Halifax. 11 and sunshine for Nain, 8 and sunny for Kuujjuaq. Sun continues down south, 11 for Montreal, 10 for Gaspé and Sept-Îles. Peterborough, mix of sun and cloud, and 11 degrees, sunny and 11 in Ottawa. Kapuskasing showers expected, 9 degrees, 7 in cloud for Big Trout Lake. Mix of sun and cloud for Churchill, and 5 degrees expected there, 8 in cloud for Norway House. 11 and sunny for Winnipeg, 10 for Dauphin, sunshine there. Lots of cloud over in Saskatoon, 8 degrees, 7 in North Battleford. 7 in cloud for La Ronge, 7 in sunshine for Buffalo Narrows, 3 and showers for Stony Rapids. Flurries expected for Fort Chip, 3 degrees there, 3 and sunshine for Grand Prairie. 4 with a mix of sun and cloud in Edmonton, 12 and sunshine for Medicine Hat. Penticton 11 and showers, sun, and 11 for Vancouver. 3 and sunny for Smithers, 5 and sunshine for Fort Nelson. Rock River -5 with a mix of sun and cloud. Watson Lake -1 and clouds. Wati, flurries expected and 1 degree, same with Yellowknife. Colville Lake -2 and snow. Paulituck, flurries and 0. Flurries for Baker Lake, -2 degrees there. New Yacht, flurries and 0. Arctic Bay -3 and flurries. Tallyoak -2 and flurries. And old-time medicine is trending in the modern medical world, with a growing number of physicians now writing prescriptions for it, it being 20 minutes a day spent in nature. Park Prescriptions is an online campaign that aims to get more doctors to physically, on paper, prescribe their patients a daily dose of nature. Studies show that written prescriptions are taken more seriously than verbal advice from doctors. Health officials say in as little as 20 minutes in nature, it can relieve stress. That 20 minutes can be spent sitting on a park bench. It could be bird watching, stargazing, or for the more active, we can go for a walk, a run, or a cycle. Research also shows that people who are more connected to nature do more to protect it. Nicole Redvers is a Dene doctor who is helping to expand the park's prescription program and hopes that it'll get Indigenous patients of all ages outdoors.
These connections are so important and thankfully are becoming more well known within the medical profession, and really a symbolism of having health providers acknowledge those benefits in the hopes of motivating patients in our communities to start re-engaging that process with nature.
Well, tomorrow night on Investigates, Christopher Reid heads to Northern Ontario, where Elections Canada has received criticism following last month's federal election. Some are even using terms like voter suppression. Here's a preview of that story.
I had the news on, and I was scrolling on Facebook, and I saw her post saying, is anybody else having trouble voting?
I got a text from Chief Dean Owen in Pekanjigum, and he said, hey, Tanya, we don't have a polling station.
My youngest daughter, she went down to vote up in Red Lake, and they told her that she couldn't vote, that she was supposed to be voting in Ear Falls.
There were still people in the community that should have voted, and they were denied that privilege, that right and privilege to vote.
I don't think it's sufficient enough to say, well, it was a snap summer election. We're here in cottage country.
Well, that shouldn't even happen. I shouldn't be begging for help from the returning officer to help the First Nation communities.
Well, what do you do about it? What do we do about it? Do we allow them to vote again? I mean, it changes the outlook, doesn't it? And it's troubling.
You can watch that full episode tomorrow right after the news. Well, Nation to Nation host Brett Forster is cooking up another new episode. Here is a look at what he has right after tonight's news.
Thanks, Melissa. Political observers join me to pull apart the Liberal cabinet shuffle. How optimistic should we be about Mark Miller's move to Crown Indigenous relations? What will it mean for Patty Hajdu as Indigenous Services Minister if she files a new court challenge on Friday? And what will Carolyn Bennett's legacy be after 6 years at the helm? Plus, an international summit on climate change convenes in Scotland next week. A representative from an Indigenous delegation explains what they hope to achieve. Stick around for that in just a few moments.
Thanks, Brett. We're looking forward to that. Well, we are all out of time for your news tonight. I'm Melissa Ridgen. Thanks for joining us, and stay tuned right now for that Nation to Nation with Brett Forster.
Free, and they helped the people. The people needed them. They didn't need the people.